Dominic Moretti didn't even bother to close the bedroom door. That was the part Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about, even hours later, even after her hands had stopped shaking. Not the fact that he'd done it, not the woman beside him, hair spread across Evelyn's own pillow, one bare shoulder catching the light from the hallway. It was the door, left wide open, as if he'd been certain she wouldn't be home, as if she didn't exist enough in this house to warrant even that small, cowardly courtesy. 72 hours. That's how long Evelyn had been gone. 72 hours of airport terminals and cold conference rooms and a negotiation so brutal it had stripped 10 years off her life. She had saved 4,000 jobs that week, 4,000 families who would keep their health insurance, their mortgages, their Christmas mornings, because she had sat across from men who wanted to burn everything down and refused to let them. She came home to this. If you've ever given everything you had to someone, every late night, every sacrifice, every silent compromise, and watched them treat it like it meant nothing, then you already know what Evelyn felt standing in that hallway. You already know that particular silence, the kind that isn't peaceful, the kind that lands like a fist. Stay with this story, because what Evelyn does next will surprise you. Like this video if you believe loyalty still matters, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You don't want to miss what's coming. The flight from Geneva had landed 40 minutes early. That was the first thing that went wrong, or right, depending on how you measure it. Evelyn's assistant had already sent a car, but Evelyn told the driver she'd handle the last stretch herself. She needed the quiet. She needed 20 minutes without someone asking her something, needing something, requiring a decision from the part of her brain that had been running at full capacity for 3 days straight without real sleep. She'd caught maybe 6 hours total, broken into 90-minute intervals on a hotel room couch because the bed made her back seize up. She'd eaten whatever catering left on the conference table. She'd smiled through 14 hours of negotiations with a consortium of European logistics firms who wanted to restructure Duca Global's transatlantic shipping contracts in ways that would have gutted the American workforce. And she had dismantled their proposals so precisely, so surgically, that by the final session, 2 of their attorneys had stopped arguing and simply started taking notes. She was good at her work. She had always been good at her work. The town car dropped her 2 blocks from the Manhattan penthouse because there was construction on the avenue and she didn't feel like waiting. She walked. Her rolling suitcase bumped over uneven sidewalk. The May air was cool and she hadn't bothered to put her blazer back on after the flight, so the chill hit the back of her neck and she just let it. It felt clean. It felt real. It felt like the first genuinely physical sensation she'd registered in days that wasn't stress-adjacent. The penthouse building's doorman, Gerald, was on a phone call when she came through the lobby. He startled when he saw her, started to say something. She held up a hand. "I'm fine, don't bother," and kept walking to the elevator. She noticed later that he looked relieved when she didn't stop. She would think about that. She would think about it for a long time. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer, private access. Dominic had insisted on that when they bought the place 8 years ago. No shared hallway, no neighbors, no foot traffic. Complete privacy. She thought it was romantic once. The foyer was dark. The city bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows on the far side of the living room, orange and silver, restless. Someone had left a glass on the kitchen counter. 2 glasses, actually. She registered without registering it, the way you absorb information you aren't ready to process yet. A suit jacket was draped over the back of a dining chair. Dominic's. She'd seen that jacket 100 times. Italian wool, charcoal gray, the one he wore to board dinners. She set her suitcase by the door, rolled her shoulder, walked toward the hallway. The bedroom door was open. The light from the city came through the window in there too, and it was enough. It was more than enough. Dominic was on his back, one arm thrown across his face. He was asleep. He was deeply, completely asleep, the way men sleep when they have no immediate fear of consequence. And beside him, curled toward the window with the sheets pulled to her shoulder, was Sabrina Vaughn. Evelyn had hired Sabrina. That was the detail that arrived first, before the rage, before the grief, before anything recognizable. She had hired Sabrina 14 months ago from a short list of candidates she had personally vetted. Sabrina had the sharpest organizational instincts of any executive assistant Evelyn had interviewed in a decade. Evelyn had brought her in specifically to manage Dominic's schedule because Dominic's previous assistant had burned out and left, and Evelyn was tired of his calendar being a disaster. She had hired the woman sleeping in her bed. Evelyn stood in the doorway for what might have been 10 seconds or 3 minutes. Her body had stopped relaying accurate time signals. She was aware of her own breathing. She was aware of the texture of the doorframe under her hand. She'd reached out and put her hand on it. She didn't remember doing that. The wood was cold. She focused on that. The cold of the doorframe, solid, factual, real. She did not scream. She did not turn on the light. She did not throw anything, though her eyes found the bedside lamp and she was aware that she registered it, cataloged it, and put it away again. She took out her phone. Her hands were steady. This surprised her, distantly. Some part of her brain that was older than emotion, colder and more precise than anything she felt right now, had taken the controls. Later, she would recognize it as the same part that took over in the 14th hour of a negotiation when she was exhausted and the other side thought they had her. The part that did not panic, the part that only counted. She photographed the room. She photographed them. She photographed the glasses in the kitchen and the jacket on the chair and the shoes she hadn't noticed before. A woman's heels near the entryway. Good ones. Cream-colored. The kind you buy when someone with money and taste is paying attention to you. Then she walked back to the foyer, picked up her suitcase, and left the way she came. Gerald was off the phone when the elevator doors opened. He looked at her. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. She walked through the lobby and back out onto the avenue and stood on the sidewalk while the city moved around her like she wasn't there, and that was fine. That was exactly what she needed, to be nobody for 1 minute. Her phone said it was 11:47 p.m. She'd been inside the penthouse for less than 6 minutes. She didn't cry. Not then. She found that strange later. She'd cried plenty in her life. At funerals, at certain passages in certain books, once embarrassingly at a film about a horse. But standing on a Manhattan sidewalk with photographic evidence of her husband's affair on her phone and 72 sleepless hours in her bones, she didn't cry. She hailed a cab instead. She gave the driver an address, her firm's office on the 53rd floor of a building 12 blocks north, and sat in the back seat watching the city go past, and very carefully, very methodically, she began to think. This is the thing people get wrong about Evelyn Hartwell. They read her restraint as coldness. They read her composure as detachment. They assume that because she doesn't come apart in public, she doesn't feel things. They've been assuming that her entire career, and it has always been their mistake. She felt everything. She just felt it in a different order. The grief would come. She knew it would come the way you know a storm is arriving before the sky shows it. The humiliation. The specific, intimate wound of being replaced in your own bed by someone you yourself had trusted. The ugliness of knowing how long it might have been going on, of running the math backward, of remembering every trip, every late meeting, every evening Dominic had been distracted in ways she'd attributed to work stress. That would all come. She would give it its proper time. But right now she had a more immediate problem. Dominic Moretti was the public face of Duca Global Holdings. His name was on the press releases. His photograph was in the financial magazines. He gave the speeches at the investor conferences and shook hands with the politicians and smiled for the cameras with the easy warmth of a man who had never in his life been made to feel small. The world believed he ran the empire. Evelyn had built the empire, not in a metaphorical sense, not in the supportive wife behind every great man sense. She had, over the course of 18 years of marriage and 17 years of building this institution, created every structural system that kept it functional and legitimate. She had rewritten the corporate governance documents 4 times. She had personally negotiated the banking relationships that gave them liquidity access most companies their size couldn't touch. She had built the compliance architecture that kept their operations clean enough to survive federal scrutiny 3 separate times. She had hired most of the senior leadership team. She had fired the ones who needed firing before they became problems. She had done all of this while Dominic shook hands and smiled. She respected that part of him. She had, for most of their marriage, genuinely respected his ability to fill a room, to inspire loyalty in men who didn't respect anything easily, to make the organization feel like a family rather than a corporation. He had something she didn't, a kind of physical, emotional, magnetic authority that people followed instinctively. She wasn't sentimental about the fact that her own gifts were less visible. That was just reality. You worked with what you had, but she had also, from the very beginning, been careful. The cab stopped. She paid and got out and stood in front of her office building and looked up at the dark glass and thought about a document she had written 6 years ago that almost nobody in the organization knew existed. Governance Protocol 7. She drafted it during a period when Dominic had been making decisions she found alarming. Not illegal, not then, but reckless. He'd been expanding too fast, taking on acquisitions that stretched their liquidity, delegating authority without appropriate oversight. She'd raised it with him 3 times. He'd heard her out, agreed in general terms, and then continued doing exactly what he'd been doing. So she'd written the protocol. She'd buried it in the governance documents during a routine update, flagged it to Nathan Carlisle, their longtime family attorney, a man who had known Dominic since childhood and who trusted Evelyn's judgment above anyone's, and explained what it was for. An emergency succession mechanism. A way for the board's trustees to freeze executive authority if a leader's conduct, personal or professional, was determined to pose a material risk to the institution. Dominic had signed the governance update. He signed everything Evelyn put in front of him. He trusted her. She thought about that for a moment, standing on the sidewalk. He trusted her completely. That was the thing. Whatever he'd done, whatever he'd let happen, he had never once doubted that she was managing things properly. He hadn't even bothered to understand what she was managing. He'd just trusted her and kept going, kept expanding, kept making decisions without looking at the structures beneath his feet. He had no idea what those structures could do. She went into the building. The night security guard, Matteo, looked up with mild surprise. He knew her face, knew she worked unusual hours, and nodded her through without comment. She rode up to the 53rd floor, walked down the hall to her office, and turned on the desk lamp rather than the overhead lights. She sat down. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the governance documents archive, found Protocol 7, and read it once, carefully, the way you read something you've written yourself and need to see clearly again after years have passed. Every clause, every condition, every mechanism. Then she opened a secure encrypted storage application and transferred the photographs from her phone. All of them. She created 3 separate backup locations: the firm's own servers, a private cloud account with 2-factor authentication, and a physical encrypted drive she kept in her office safe. She did this methodically, without rushing, the way she did everything. Then she sat back and looked at the city through her office windows. Somewhere across those 12 blocks, Dominic was still asleep. Sabrina was still in his bed. The glasses were still on the counter. The cream-colored heels were still by the door. None of that could be undone. She understood that now, finally, completely. There are things you can't unsee. There are moments that divide everything that comes before them from everything that comes after, and the line is permanent, and no amount of understanding or generosity or goodwill can move it. Her marriage was over. She didn't say it out loud. She wasn't the kind of person who narrated her own moments, but she felt it settle into her body with a finality that was almost physical, something released, something that had been held in tension for longer than she'd admitted to herself. She pulled up Nathan Carlisle's contact information. It was almost midnight. She would not call him tonight. He was 63 and had a heart condition, and she respected him too much to do that to him. She would call him at 7 in the morning, which was when he arrived at his office, regardless of what day it was, and she would tell him what she'd found, and she would tell him what she needed, and then the machinery would start to move. She didn't feel powerful making that decision. She felt tired. She felt the full weight of 72 sleepless hours settle into her shoulders and the backs of her eyes. She felt the specific ache of grief that doesn't have anywhere to go yet, because the practical mind is still running the show. She pulled a throw blanket from the closet behind her desk. She'd kept one there for years, for late nights just like this, and she lay down on her office couch, and she closed her eyes. She thought about something Dominic's father had said to her once. Marco Moretti, dead 6 years now. A man who had built the original empire from nothing and understood, better than his own son, what that building cost. He'd said, "The ones who last are the ones who know when to be quiet." She hadn't fully understood it then. She thought it was about negotiation. She understood it now. She was quiet. She was completely, deliberately, dangerously quiet. And in the morning, the Empire would begin to find out what that meant. Nathan Carlyle arrived at his office at 7 o'clock every morning without exception. He had done this for 31 years. His assistant didn't come in until 8:30, so the first 90 minutes of his day were his own. Coffee from the machine in the break room, the financial news on low volume, the quiet work of thinking before the phone started. His phone rang at 7:04. He looked at the screen. Evelyn. He picked up on the second ring. "Tell me where you are," he said. No greeting. He'd known her long enough to skip that. "My office." Her voice was level, not the level of someone who'd processed something and come out the other side, the level of someone who'd decided not to feel it yet. He recognized the difference. He'd heard it from her before, years ago, when a rival firm had tried to poach 3 of her senior partners overnight, and she'd called him at midnight to discuss the response. "When did you get back?" "Last night, earlier than expected." He waited. Nathan Carlyle had built his entire career on knowing when to wait. "I need you to come in," she said. "Not your office, mine. And Nathan, don't tell anyone you're coming." He was in his car 11 minutes later. She looked exactly as bad as he'd expected. She'd slept on her office couch. He could tell from the crease along her cheekbone and the way she was holding her coffee cup with both hands like it was the only warm thing in the room. She hadn't changed clothes. Her hair was pulled back with what looked like a rubber band she'd found in her desk drawer. She handed him her phone without a word. He looked at the photographs. All of them. He didn't rush, and he didn't look away, and he didn't say anything until he'd seen everyone. Then he set the phone on her desk, very carefully, the way you set down something that requires respect in its handling. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "Since midnight." "Have you slept?" "A little." He sat down across from her. Outside her windows, the city was doing its morning thing. Trucks, cabs, the early crowd on the sidewalks below. The world entirely unconcerned with what was sitting in this room. "Okay," he said. "Talk to me." So she talked. Not the way people talk when they're unraveling, not fragmented, not looping back on itself. She talked the way she always talked, chronologically, factually, with a clarity that would have been impressive if he hadn't found it slightly heartbreaking under the circumstances. She told him about the flight landing early, the walk from the cab, the open door, what she'd seen, what she'd done. The photographs, the backups, the fact that she'd left the penthouse without waking either of them. "Protocol 7, she said at the end. He was quiet for a moment. "You want to activate it. I want you to tell me if there's a reason not to." He thought about it, genuinely thought about it, which was one of the reasons she'd trusted him for 17 years. He didn't reach for reassurance. He didn't reach for caution. He just thought. "The conduct clause is broad enough," he said finally. "We drafted it that way deliberately. Personal conduct that poses material risk to the institution. The photographs alone might not be enough. Infidelity isn't illegal, and the board's moral standards are inconsistent at best. But if this is part of a pattern, it is," she said. She slid a folder across the desk. He opened it. Inside were printed copies of internal memoranda, 12 of them, spanning the last 2 years. All written by Evelyn. All flagged to Dominic as formal written warnings. Compliance gaps. Procurement shortcuts. Trustee oversight being bypassed on acquisitions over $50 million. Delegation of executive authority to mid-level managers without board approval. Nathan read them slowly. He read them the way he read contracts, looking for the places where the language told you more than it intended. He never responded to any of these in writing, he said. Verbally, every time verbally. He'd hear me out, agree in the room, and then nothing would change. "You documented the verbal responses?" She gave him a look that suggested she found the question mildly insulting. "Right," he said. "Of course you did." He closed the folder. He picked up his coffee, which had gone cold, and drank it anyway. "Evelyn, I have to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly. When have I not? Are you doing this because of what you found last night? Or are you doing this because the institution genuinely needs it?" The question hung in the room, She didn't answer immediately, which he respected. Both, she said, and I know those are supposed to be incompatible, but I've been watching him make decisions for 2 years that I couldn't stop through normal channels, and I documented every one of them because I knew this day was coming. I didn't know what form it would take, but I knew something would break eventually. She looked at him steadily. The photographs are the trigger. They're not the cause. Nathan put the folder in his briefcase. I'll need 48 hours, he said, to contact the trustees, review the succession clauses, and prepare the documentation. We do this properly, or we don't do it at all. Properly, she agreed. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and paused at the door. Where are you going to stay? I'll figure something out. Evelyn. I'm not going back there, Nathan. Not tonight. He nodded once. I'll be in touch by end of day. After he left, she sat for a long time looking at the closed door. Then she picked up her phone, opened a new message, and typed 4 words to her personal assistant. Book me a hotel. She did not specify how many nights. Dominic woke up at 8:15 and reached across the bed automatically, the way you reach for someone when your body has memorized the habit, but your brain hasn't caught up yet. His hand found empty sheets on Evelyn's side. He registered this without concern. She was in Geneva. She wasn't due back until Thursday. He stretched, looked at the ceiling, felt the particular satisfied heaviness of a man who had slept well and had no immediate obligations. Then Sabrina's voice came from the bathroom. There's no clean towels in here. And the evening came back to him in pieces. He sat up, rubbed his face. The city was already bright through the windows, and he hadn't pulled the curtains, which was unusual. Evelyn always pulled the curtains, and the light was aggressive. Check the cabinet under the sink, he called back. He heard her rummaging, then found one. He got up and went to the kitchen and poured himself water from the filter on the counter. He drank it standing up. He noticed, without attaching any significance to it, that there were 2 glasses already on the counter that should have been in the dishwasher. He put them in. He was scrambling eggs when Sabrina came out of the bedroom, dressed, her heels in one hand. She looked put together in the quick, efficient way of someone who had had practice reassembling themselves in unfamiliar spaces. I need to be in the office by 9, she said. I know. Are you coming in? Later. He pushed the eggs around the pan. Sit down. I'll make you something. I can't. She was checking her phone, already somewhere else mentally. Dominic. He looked up. She called the office last night, Sabrina said. From the plane. Her assistant sent me a message. She landed early. Something moved through him, quick and cold, like touching metal in winter. How early? Sabrina looked up from her phone. They held eye contact for a beat that lasted longer than either of them found comfortable. I don't know the exact time, she said carefully. Her assistant just said the flight was ahead of schedule. He turned back to the eggs. She's not due until Thursday. I know that. She would have called. Sabrina was quiet. She was looking at him with something he didn't love. Not fear exactly, more like the particular watchfulness of someone calculating distance between themselves and a problem. She didn't call me either, Sabrina said. I checked. Dominic turned off the stove. The eggs weren't done, but he wasn't hungry anymore. Go to the office, he said. I'll see you there later. She left without another word. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the elevator doors close, and then he took out his phone and called Evelyn. It went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He texted, Hey, heard your flight was early. You home? I was out late. Dinner ran long. Didn't want to wake you. He set the phone on the counter and looked at it for a moment. He'd lied about dinner without thinking. It was automatic. That automatic quality bothered him more than the lie itself. The phone stayed silent. Evelyn saw both missed calls. She was in her new hotel room, a suite 2 miles from the penthouse, overlooking a park, which she'd chosen specifically because she could see trees, and she was showered and dressed in clothes her assistant had brought from the dry cleaners, and she was sitting in the chair by the window reading through Dominic's last 18 months of procurement decisions when her phone buzzed with his text. She read it once, read it again. Dinner ran long. She set the phone face down on the side table. She was aware of a sensation in her chest. Pressure. specific and low, the kind that had nothing to do with her lungs. She breathed through it. She had things to do today. She had a 10 o'clock call with the lead trustee, Margaret Cho, whom Nathan had already briefed in general terms. She had a noon meeting with the forensic accounting firm she'd retained 4 months ago when one of the procurement discrepancies had looked wrong in a way she couldn't immediately explain. She had a 3 o'clock with her own personal attorney, separate from the firm, to begin divorce proceedings. She had a full day. She turned the phone face up, typed, "Tired. At the office early. Talk later." And put it away. Not a confrontation. Not yet. You don't show your hand before the cards are dealt. Marcus Webb had worked in forensic accounting for 22 years, and he had a particular way of describing findings that Evelyn had always appreciated. He told you what he knew, then he told you what he suspected, and he was very precise about which was which. He sat across from her at the small conference table in her suite at noon, with 3 printed reports, and the expression of a man who has found something unpleasant and feels a professional obligation to be pleasant about it. "The short version," he said, "is that someone has been siphoning money through your procurement chain for approximately 14 months. She didn't move. How much? Confirmed so far? 6.2 million. Potentially double that once we finish tracing the intermediary accounts. Through what mechanism? Inflated consulting contracts. 4 of them, all awarded in the last 16 months. The contractor is a company called Vertex Advisory Solutions, incorporated in Delaware 18 months ago. They've received contracts for logistics consulting, digital security assessments, HR process design, and supply chain optimization." He slid the first report across the table. None of those projects appear to have produced any deliverable outputs. Evelyn looked at the documents. Who approved the contracts? 3 were approved by Dominic Moretti directly. 1 was approved by a VP of operations named Gregory Halst, who has since left the company. He paused. Ms. Hartwell, Vertex Advisory Solutions has 1 listed director. The name on the incorporation documents is Tyler Vaughn. Evelyn looked up. "Do you know that name?" Webb asked. "Tell me what you know about him." 26 years old, no prior business history, no professional credentials I can find. He slid the second report across. His sister is Sabrina Vaughn, currently serving as executive assistant to Dominic Moretti. The room was very quiet. Evelyn looked at the documents. She took her time. She felt something clarifying inside her, but not anger, or not only anger, but the specific focused quality of a person who has just understood the full shape of a problem they'd previously only seen the edges of. "Who else knows this?" she said. "My team, that's it. Keep it that way. I need 48 hours before this goes anywhere else." Webb nodded. "There's one more thing." He slid the third report across. "We found a secondary email account registered to a personal domain. Someone has been forwarding procurement communications to it. Board meeting summaries, vendor contracts, executive decision logs." He met her eyes. "The forwarding was set up 11 months ago from Dominic's office computer, but the access pattern suggests the account was being checked from a different device. A mobile number registered to..." "Sabrina Vaughn," Evelyn said. "Yes." She sat back. Outside the hotel windows, traffic moved below in thin, patient streams. "She's been building a file," Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. "That's my read, yes." "For what purpose?" "Insurance," Webb said simply. "Or leverage, or both." Evelyn thought about that. About a woman who had looked across an office and made calculations. About the particular kind of intelligence that runs parallel to warmth, that smiles genuinely at you from across a conference table while quietly deciding what your relationship is worth and what it costs. She wasn't even angry at Sabrina exactly. She found that surprising. She felt something closer to exhausted recognition, the feeling of seeing a move you'd seen before, played by different people in different rooms, the fundamental human impulse to protect yourself at someone else's expense. What she felt about Dominic was different, heavier, more personal, but that was for later. "Continue the audit," she told Webb. "I want everything documented to evidentiary standard. Every invoice, every approval chain, every forwarding record. Assume this is going to federal investigators within 60 days. His eyebrows moved slightly. You're referring this to federal authorities? I'm not doing anything yet. I'm preparing for every possible outcome. She stood. Thank you, Marcus. The call Dominic didn't expect came at 3:15 that afternoon. He was in his corner office at Duca Global's Manhattan headquarters. 40 floors up, windows on two sides, the kind of office that was designed to make a specific statement about the person sitting in it. He'd been distracted all day, checking his phone, rereading Evelyn's text and finding its brevity somehow more unsettling than silence would have been. His direct line rang. The display said, Margaret Cho, Board Trustee. He picked up. Margaret, this is a surprise. Dominic. Her voice was its usual precise self. Margaret Cho had been a federal judge before she'd joined private practice, and she still sounded like one. I'm going to need you to clear your calendar for Thursday. The full trustee council is convening. He straightened in his chair. What's the occasion? Routine governance review. We're examining some operational matters that require trustee oversight. A beat. It came up during a compliance flagging process. Nothing to be alarmed about. He had been in business long enough to know that when someone told you there was nothing to be alarmed about, there was something to be alarmed about. Which operational matters, he said. The details will be in the briefing documents Nathan sends over tomorrow morning. Her tone didn't change. That was the thing about Margaret. She could deliver genuinely alarming information in a voice indistinguishable from discussing lunch. I'd appreciate your confirmation that you'll attend. Of course, he said, because what else do you say? Good. Thursday at 9, the usual location. A pause that lasted precisely 1 second. Give my best to Evelyn. The line went dead. He sat holding the phone. Give my best to Evelyn. He called Evelyn again. Third time. Voicemail again. He put the phone on his desk and stared at it and tried to identify exactly what he was feeling. Not guilt, or not only guilt, something adjacent to it, something with more edges. He was a man who operated on instinct, and his instinct right now was loud and specific. Something was happening that he couldn't see yet. He pulled up the internal governance document archive on his computer. He searched for Protocol 7. The search returned no results. He searched for emergency succession. No results. He sat back. The governance archive had never returned no results on a search before. He was thorough on computers. He'd never been required to be thorough because Evelyn managed all of that. But the absence of results itself felt like information. He opened his door and called to his assistant. Get me the full governance document file. Physical copies, everything updated in the last 3 years. His assistant, temporary since Sabrina was fielding calls downstairs, looked up with mild confusion. I'll need to request those from legal. Then request them. It might take until tomorrow morning. Today, he said, before 5. She nodded uncertainly and reached for her phone. He went back into his office and stood at the window looking at the city and thought about Evelyn's text. Tired. At the office early. Talk later. He thought about the open bedroom door. He thought about the 2 glasses on the counter that he'd put in the dishwasher without thinking. A slow, cold understanding was beginning to move through him. Not complete yet. The full shape was still obscured, but enough. Enough to know that whatever was coming on Thursday was not routine. Enough to know that the machinery of something was already in motion and that it was moving faster than he could see. He called Sabrina. She picked up on the first ring. Margaret Cho just called me, he said. Trustee Council Thursday. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of someone who'd already anticipated bad news and is deciding how to respond to it arriving. Sabrina. I heard you. Is there something I need to know? Another pause. Shorter this time. No, she said. It's probably routine. The same word Margaret had used. Routine. He hung up without responding. He stood in his office, and the city stretched out below him in every direction, enormous and indifferent, and for the first time in a very long time, Dominic Moretti felt the particular vertigo of a man who has been standing on something he believed was solid, and is only now, too late, beginning to feel it shift beneath his feet. He picked up his phone one more time and called Evelyn. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and this time he left a message. Ev. He stopped, started again. I need to talk to you, not by text. Call me when you get this. Another pause. Please. He didn't say anything else. He didn't know what else to say. That was new. Dominic Moretti, who had always known what to say in every room he'd ever entered, standing alone in his corner office with the city spread out below him like an accusation, and nothing left to reach for. Down on the 32nd floor, in a small glass-walled office she'd been assigned when she first joined the company, Sabrina Vaughn ended her own call. Not with Dominic, a different call, one she'd placed herself 3 minutes ago to a number she'd saved under a false name, and opened the drawer of her desk. Inside, behind a folder of vendor contracts, was a small encrypted flash drive. She looked at it for a moment. Then she closed the drawer. Not yet, but soon. Sabrina didn't sleep that night. She sat in her apartment, a good apartment, the kind she couldn't have afforded 14 months ago, on the 31st floor of a building in Midtown with a doorman and heated floors and a kitchen she barely used. And she sat at her dining table with the flash drive in front of her and her laptop open, and she thought about math. Not numbers exactly, outcomes. She'd always been good at outcomes, at looking at a situation and mapping the distances between where she was and where she needed to be, and identifying the fastest route. It was why she'd been good at her job. It was why Evelyn Hartwell had hired her. She thought about that now, and something in her chest moved uncomfortably. Evelyn had been kind to her during the interview, not performatively kind, not the practiced warmth of someone who needed to be liked, genuinely attentive. She'd asked questions nobody else had asked, things about how Sabrina organized competing priorities, how she handled principals who made decisions without communicating them, what she did when she identified a problem she didn't have the authority to fix. She'd listened to the answers, actually listened. Sabrina had taken the job because the money was exceptional and the access was extraordinary, and she had recognized immediately that being close to Dominic Moretti meant being close to power in ways that most people in her position never touched. She had not expected to like Evelyn. That part had been inconvenient. She pushed the thought away. Liking someone and what you owed them were different calculations, and she had learned that lesson early, and she wasn't going to unlearn it now. She opened her laptop and checked the secure email account she'd set up 8 months ago, the one with no connection to any device registered to her name. There was a message from the buyer. She'd found him through a chain of introductions so indirect she could barely reconstruct it. A contact of a contact, someone who moved in the margins of industries she'd only glimpsed from her position next to Dominic. His messages were always brief. This one read, "Confirm meeting, tomorrow. Location as discussed. Come alone. Bring everything." She read it twice. Then she closed the laptop. Everything. The flash drive contained 14 months of procurement records, internal executive correspondence, financial approval chains, and 3 board meeting summaries that had never been made public. It contained enough to embarrass the company, possibly enough to destabilize it if it reached the right people at the right moment. She'd built it as insurance. That was what she told herself in the beginning. If Dominic turned on her, when Dominic turned on her, she'd corrected herself months ago because she was honest enough to know a when from an if. She would need something to stand on, something that made her useful rather than expendable. The meeting tomorrow was the first time she was converting insurance into currency. She picked up the flash drive and held it. It was small, lighter than what it contained. She put it in the interior zip pocket of her bag, turned off the lights, and went to bed. She did not sleep well, but she slept. Thursday morning arrived gray and close, the sky the color of old concrete, the air heavy with moisture that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to be rain. Evelyn was in the back of a car by 8:15, dressed in charcoal, no jewelry except her watch, her hair pulled back in the way that meant she wasn't trying to look like anything other than what she was. Nathan was already at the building when she arrived. He met her in the lobby, and they walked to the elevator together without speaking, which was something she appreciated about him. He understood that some mornings didn't require conversation. In the elevator, he said, "The trustees have the preliminary briefing documents. Margaret reviewed the Protocol 7 language last night and confirmed it's applicable. All 7 trustees? 6 confirmed present. Harlan Voss is joining by secure video from London. She nodded. Evelyn. He waited until she looked at him. Dominic is already upstairs. She absorbed that. He came early. By 30 minutes. He's been in the anteroom. He hasn't spoken to anyone. The elevator opened. She stepped out first. The council chamber was below ground. A deliberate architectural choice made by Marco Moretti decades ago, when he'd built the original Duca Global headquarters. No windows. No outside noise. A room designed for decisions that needed to be made without the world looking in. The walls were dark wood paneling. The table was long and polished and old, the kind of table that had absorbed decades of difficult conversations into its grain. Dominic was standing near the far wall when she entered. She had not seen him since the hallway, since the open door and the 2 sleeping figures and the cream-colored heels by the entryway. 47 hours. She had not spoken to him, had not returned his calls, had listened to his voicemail once, and then set her phone down and breathed for 60 seconds before continuing with her day. He looked at her when she came in. She looked back. He'd aged since yesterday, not in any visible physical way. His face was the same jaw and dark eyes, and the particular quality of presence that had always made him the person people looked at when he entered a room. But something behind his eyes was different, something that knew. Evelyn, he said. Dominic. She set her bag on the table and took her seat, not across from him, at the chair to Nathan's right, which placed her at the head-adjacent position she'd occupied at every governance meeting for 17 years. Sit down. They're ready to start. He didn't move for a moment. He was looking at her the way a person looks at something they can't quite resolve, the way you look at a familiar room that's been rearranged in ways you can't immediately identify. We should talk, he said, before this starts. We'll talk after. Evelyn, Dominic. Not loud, not sharp, just final. Sit down. He sat. Yeah. Margaret Cho ran the session with the efficiency of someone who had presided over federal proceedings and found corporate governance comparatively simple. She introduced the agenda without editorializing. She established that all 7 trustees were present and that the session was being recorded per standard protocol. She confirmed that legal counsel, Nathan, for the institution, was present and that Dominic had been offered the opportunity to bring personal counsel, which he had declined. That detail would matter later. Nathan presented the documentation in sections. First, the compliance memoranda, 12 written warnings from Evelyn to Dominic over 26 months, covering specific operational decisions that had bypassed trustee oversight. He read the relevant passages aloud in the flat, unhurried voice of a man who understood that tone was evidence too. The room was silent. Several of the trustees made notes, then the procurement findings from Marcus Webb's audit, then the photographs. Dominic didn't look at the photographs when they appeared on the screen. He looked at his hands on the table. His jaw was tight. A muscle moved in his neck once, and then he controlled it. Harlan Voss's voice came through the speaker at the end of the table. London, 9 hours ahead, slightly tinny but clear. When were these taken? Tuesday night, Nathan said, by Ms. Hartwell upon returning to the marital residence from a business trip to Geneva. In the marital bedroom. Yes. A silence. And the woman in the photographs is the executive assistant, Margaret said. Not a question. Sabrina Vaughn, currently on administrative leave as of this morning. Dominic's head came up. She's on leave. His voice was controlled, but barely. Since when? Since 7 this morning, Nathan said. Standard procedure during an active compliance investigation. Nobody told me. The notification was sent to your office and to HR simultaneously. It falls within trustee authority during an active review. Another muscle moved in Dominic's jaw. I'm still executive chairman. You're currently under trustee review, Margaret said. Her voice didn't change. Standard governance procedure. You were informed of that when this meeting was convened. I was told it was a routine governance. Mr. Moretti, Margaret's voice acquired the quality it must have had on the bench. You were presented with the agenda this morning before this session began. You chose not to bring personal counsel. Those were your decisions. We're going to continue. He looked at Evelyn. She was looking at the documents in front of her. She didn't look up. The procurement findings took 90 minutes to present. Webb had prepared well. Every inflated contract, every shell company transaction, every wire transfer, mapped against the timeline of executive approvals and the parallel timeline of Sabrina Vaughn's access to procurement systems. Dominic listened to all of it. His face went through several things during that 90 minutes. Disbelief, then a particular quality of dawning that was worse than disbelief, then something that Evelyn, watching from her peripheral vision, recognized as the expression of a man understanding that he'd been used. He hadn't known about the shell company. She was certain of that by the time the presentation was half over. He was not a man who could absorb information of this magnitude and maintain the precise quality of stillness he was maintaining unless he was genuinely encountering it for the first time. She knew how he looked when he was hiding something. She had 17 years of data on that. He hadn't known. Which meant Sabrina had operated beneath him, inside the access he'd given her, without his knowledge. Which meant the access he'd given her without oversight had created the exact environmental conditions Webb had described. Which meant that Dominic's negligence, not malice, negligence, had made all of it possible. That distinction would matter legally. It would not matter institutionally. "Mr. Moretti," Nathan said when Webb finished, "do you have any response to these findings?" Dominic was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know about Vertex Advisory," he said. "I didn't approve those contracts knowing they were fraudulent. I signed what came across my desk." "Were you aware who owned Vertex Advisory Solutions?" "No." "Were you aware that 3 of the 4 contracts were above the threshold requiring trustee co-signature?" A pause. "I may not have—" "The threshold is $50 million, Nathan said. "It's in the governance document you signed in 2021. 2 of these contracts were $62 million and $78 million, respectively." Silence. "I delegated procurement review," Dominic said. "To whom?" "To—" He stopped. "To Sabrina Vaughn," Nathan said. "Yes, that's documented." The room was very quiet. Evelyn finally looked up. Dominic was looking at the table. His hands were flat on the surface, both of them, like a man steadying himself. She felt something. Looking at him, she'd expected to feel nothing by now, or had hoped for it. Instead, there was something complicated and unwelcome. Not sympathy exactly, more like the specific grief of watching someone you once knew very well understand something terrible about their own story. She looked back at her documents. They broke at 11:30. Dominic walked to the anteroom and stood by the wall, and one of the trustees' staff brought him water that he didn't drink. Nathan found Evelyn in the corridor, and they spoke quietly. "The vote," she said. "After lunch. Margaret wants the trustees to have time to review the succession clause. They've had the documents since yesterday. She's being thorough. Let her." Evelyn nodded. She looked down the corridor toward the anteroom. Through the half-open door, she could see Dominic's shoulder, the back of his head. "He didn't know about the money," she said. "No," Nathan agreed. "That needs to be part of the formal record. He had no knowledge of the fraudulent scheme." Nathan looked at her carefully. "Evelyn, I'm not doing him a favor. I'm maintaining the accuracy of the record. There's a difference." She met his eyes. "Put it in." He nodded slowly. "All right." Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Marcus Webb, a message flagged urgent. She stepped further down the corridor and called him back. He picked up immediately. "She's moving," he said. "What?" "Vaughn. Our surveillance contact just flagged it. She left her apartment 40 minutes ago. She's not going to the office. She's heading downtown. She has a bag with her." Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened slightly. "Downtown where?" "We're tracking the phone. She's near the financial district." "She's going to the meeting." "That's my read." She thought fast. The flash drive. If Sabrina delivered that drive to whoever was buying it, whoever had the resources to acquire and potentially weaponize 14 months of internal Duca Global documentation, it wouldn't just be embarrassing. The timing, with a trustee review actively in session, could be catastrophic. Not for the institution permanently, but for the current proceedings. An external leak during an active governance review created legal complexity that could delay, challenge, or contaminate the entire process. "Call the federal contact," she said. "The one from the DOJ Compliance Task Force." A beat. "Evelyn, if we bring federal investigators in now, not to interfere, to observe. If she hands that drive to a buyer, I want it recovered through proper judicial process. I want a chain of custody that's untouchable." Her voice was steady. "We do not touch her. We do not intercept her. We let her make the transaction, and we let the investigators do their job. That means she gets arrested." "Yes." Silence on the line. "She made her choices," Evelyn said. "Not cold, not cruel, just accurate. Make the call." But Sabrina found the location without difficulty. A coffee shop in the financial district, the kind of anonymous place with too many tables and enough ambient noise to make conversation private. She arrived 7 minutes early. She ordered a coffee she didn't want and sat at the table in the back corner and checked her phone and made herself breathe normally. The buyer arrived at exactly noon. He was older than she'd expected. Late 50s, compact, wearing a suit that was expensive without being conspicuous. He sat across from her and did not order anything and looked at her with the evaluative flatness of someone who was very accustomed to this type of meeting. "You have it," he said. "I need to understand the arrangement first." "We've discussed the arrangement. I want it confirmed in person." She kept her voice even. She'd rehearsed this part. $2 million transferred to the account I provided. Confirmation of transfer before I hand over anything. And a guarantee that my name doesn't appear in anything you use this for." He looked at her for a moment. "That's not how this works." Her stomach moved. We agreed on a price. I didn't agree to absorb your legal exposure." He leaned forward slightly. "You took documents from your employer. That's theft. I'm not buying your liability along with your merchandise." "Then we don't have a deal." "Then you leave here with a flash drive full of evidence of your own crimes and nowhere to put it." He said it pleasantly, like he was noting the weather. "Because if you try to use that material yourself, you implicate yourself in everything on it. And if you destroy it, you lose your only leverage." He tilted his head. "So let's discuss realistic options." She looked at him. She had prepared for a lot of things going wrong in this meeting. She had not prepared for this specific kind of wrong, the kind where the person across the table was entirely calm because they held more cards than she'd understood. "I want $1.5 million, she said. Her voice stayed level. She didn't know how. "And I want it wired before I leave this table." He considered. $1 million. Wired within the hour after I verify the drive's contents." She opened her bag. She never got to the interior zip pocket. 3 men who had been sitting at separate tables stood up simultaneously. She registered movement, registered the specific quality of it. Not random, coordinated. And the man across from her registered it too, and his face changed for the first time, losing its pleasantness like a mask dropping. One of the standing men showed credentials. Federal. The other 2 moved to positions that made leaving the table a theoretical exercise. The man across from her very slowly put both hands on the table. Sabrina sat completely still. Her bag was on her lap. Her hands were on her bag. She thought about running, and her body calculated the geometry of the room and concluded in approximately 1 second that running was not a real option. She thought about the flash drive. She thought about Evelyn. She thought she knew. Not a guess. Certainty. The kind that arrives fully formed, without needing evidence, because once you understand what you're looking at. The pattern is obvious. Evelyn had known she'd built a file. Evelyn had known about the meeting. Evelyn had let her walk in here because letting her complete the transaction in front of federal witnesses was cleaner, legally, than anything else. She thought about the interview, the attentive questions, the genuine listening. She thought about the fact that the woman who had hired her, trusted her, and placed her in proximity to everything she'd used against her had apparently known something was wrong long enough to build a response this precise. The federal agent said her name. She put her bag on the table. Outside the coffee shop, 2 blocks north, Evelyn's phone buzzed once. A message from Webb. Done. Evidence secured. Chain of custody confirmed. She was standing in the corridor outside the council chamber. The lunch break was almost over. Through the heavy door, she could hear the faint sound of the trustees assembling. She read the message, put the phone in her pocket, straightened her jacket. The door opened. Margaret Cho looked out and found her. "We're ready," Margaret said. Evelyn walked back into the room. Dominic was already in his seat. He looked up when she entered. His face had settled into something she'd never quite seen on him before. Not defeat, not anger. Something more fundamental than either. The expression of a man who has run the numbers and found that they don't add up to anything he recognizes. She sat down. She put her hands flat on the table and looked straight ahead at the room full of people who were about to decide the future of an institution she had spent her adult life building. And she felt, for one unguarded moment, the full weight of all of it. The 72 sleepless hours, the open door, the cream-colored heels, the 14 months of documented warnings nobody had acted on. The $6.2 million that had moved through shell companies while she was in conference rooms saving 4,000 jobs. The flash drive now in federal hands. The coffee going cold on a hotel room side table, and the voicemail she still hadn't deleted. Ivio, I need to talk to you, please. Sitting in her phone like something that had once been true. She breathed once. Margaret Cho called the session back to order, and Evelyn Hartwell lifted her eyes and looked at what she had built and what it had cost her and what came next. Margaret Cho did not waste time. She called the session to order at 12:53, and she moved through the procedural formalities, the way she moved through everything, with the particular economy of someone who understood that speed and precision were not opposites. She confirmed the recording was active. She confirmed all 7 trustees were present. She stated, for the record, that the session had moved from preliminary review to formal deliberation under the authority granted by the succession clauses embedded in the Duca Global Holdings Governance Charter, specifically the provisions established by the late Marco Moretti and ratified by the full board in 2009, amended in 2018. Dominic's head came up slightly at the mention of his father's name. Margaret didn't pause. She noted the amendment date. She noted that the provisions had been reviewed and confirmed applicable by 3 independent legal opinions, one of which had been commissioned by the trustees themselves in the last 48 hours. She noted that the standard for activation was not criminal conduct, but material risk. Conduct, personal or professional, that a reasonable trustee body could determine posed significant risk to the institution's stability, reputation, or governance integrity. She asked Nathan to summarize the grounds for the record. Nathan summarized them in 9 minutes. The affair, documented with photographic evidence. The compliance failures, documented across 26 months of written warnings. The procurement negligence, confirmed by forensic audit. The delegation of executive authority to an individual who had used that access to perpetrate financial fraud against the institution. Then Nathan said, additionally, as of approximately 12:20 this afternoon, Sabrina Vaughn was taken into federal custody in connection with the fraudulent procurement scheme and an attempted sale of confidential institutional documents to an unknown third party. The evidence recovered includes an encrypted flash drive containing internal executive correspondence, procurement records, and board meeting summaries. The drive is now in federal custody under a secured chain of evidence. The room absorbed that. Harlan Voss, from the London Speaker. The documents on the drive, are they authentic? Preliminary assessment suggests yes. Federal investigators have indicated the contents are consistent with materials generated internally over the last 14 months. Who compiled them? The evidence suggests Ms. Vaughn compiled them over an extended period, using executive system access granted to her by Mr. Moretti. Dominic said nothing. His hands were still flat on the table. The only movement in his body was the slow, controlled expansion of his chest as he breathed. Deliberate, the way you breathe when you're managing something that wants to come out differently. Margaret looked at him. Mr. Moretti, you've heard the summary. Do you have anything to add or correct before we proceed to deliberation? He looked up. He looked directly at her, not at Evelyn, and his voice when he spoke was low and even and cost him something she could see in the set of his jaw. I didn't know about the money, he said. I want that on the record. It's noted, Nathan said. The audit findings do not indicate personal knowledge or direct participation in the fraudulent scheme. But I gave her the access. He said it himself before anyone else could. I know that. I'm not. He stopped. Started again. I made decisions without adequate oversight. I know that. Margaret waited a moment to see if there was more. There wasn't. Thank you, she said. Then, we'll take 90 minutes for trustee deliberation. Mr. Moretti, you'll wait in the anteroom. Ms. Hartwell, you're also asked to step out during deliberation. Evelyn stood. She gathered her folder without hurrying. As she moved toward the door, she was aware of Dominic doing the same on the other side of the table. Aware of the specific geometry of two people moving in the same direction with the entire weight of a marriage and an empire between them. They reached the door at the same moment. He held it open. She walked through. In the corridor, without planning it, they were briefly alone. The aides and legal staff hadn't come out yet, and the nearest trustee support staff was 20 feet away at the far end of the hall. Just the two of them in the dim corridor with its dark wood walls and the faint, recycled air hum of a room that existed underground. Dominic said, quietly, "How long have you been planning this?" She didn't look at him. She looked at the middle distance, the same neutral point she'd been looking at all morning. I've been protecting the institution for 17 years. The specific timeline of recent events is in the documentation. That's not what I asked. She was quiet for a moment. I wrote Protocol 7 6 years ago. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it peripherally. The slight contraction of his face, the way information landed in his body before his expression caught up. 6 years, he said. There were warning signs 6 years ago that you chose not to address. You could have come to me. What? She turned and looked at him directly for the first time since she'd walked into the chamber that morning. I came to you 12 times. In writing. Over 26 months. I have the documents. He didn't say anything. I know you didn't steal the money, she said. I made sure Nathan put that in the record. Whatever happens next, legally, that distinction matters, and I want it protected. She held his gaze. That's not forgiveness. That's accuracy. He looked at her. Something moved across his face. Not gratitude exactly, and not guilt exactly. Something that was both of those things and older than either. Evelyn, don't. Not cruel, just clear. Not here. Not now. She walked to the far end of the corridor and stood by the wall and waited. He went into the anteroom. The door closed between them. The 90 minutes passed the way all waiting passes when the outcome matters. Too slowly to be tolerable, too quickly to feel like enough time to prepare. Evelyn stood, then sat in one of the corridor chairs, then stood again. She drank water from a paper cup a staff member brought her. She looked at her phone and found a message from her personal attorney. Divorce petition filed, confirmation number attached, and put the phone back in her pocket without responding. She thought about the empire, not abstractly, concretely. The shipping fleet, 43 vessels across 3 ocean routes. The logistics network, 11 countries, 22 distribution hubs. The hotel portfolio, 9 properties in 7 cities. The compliance infrastructure she'd built over 17 years. The governance systems, the banking relationships, the international partnerships. The 4,000 jobs saved last week in Geneva, and the 14,000 jobs that existed across the broader organization because the organization was structurally sound. She had built this. She felt no pride in the thought. It was just factual. The way the bones of a house are factual, you don't feel proud of the bones. You just understand that without them, there is no house. She thought about Marco Moretti, a man she had respected completely and disagreed with often, and found more honest than his son about the nature of what the empire was and what it required. He told her once, 3 years before he died, that the hardest thing about building something that lasted was accepting that it might outlive everything you thought you were building it for. She hadn't understood that then. She thought it was about legacy. She understood it now. At 2:27, the chamber door opened. Margaret Cho looked out. Her face gave nothing. The face of a woman who had delivered verdicts for 20 years and understood that your expression in the moment before a verdict was itself a form of power. She looked at Evelyn. She looked down the hall at the anteroom door. "We're ready," she said. Dominic walked back into the chamber first. He walked the way he'd always walked, straight, unhurried, the particular physical confidence that had never left him even now. She'd always admired that about him, even when she'd been furious with him. His body didn't know how to be diminished. It was both his greatest asset and one of the things that had made him dangerous to himself. She came in behind him. They took their seats on opposite sides of the table. Margaret remained standing. "The trustee council has reached a decision by formal vote," she said. "I'll state it plainly. By a vote of 6-1, a pause of exactly 1 second, not for drama, but because Margaret Cho was precise about language and wanted the next words to be heard clearly. The trustee council has voted to permanently remove Dominic Moretti from the position of executive chairman of Duca Global Holdings, effective immediately, under the provisions of Article 14, Section 7 of the Institutional Governance Charter. Silence. The single dissenting vote was cast in recognition of the forensic evidence confirming Mr. Moretti's lack of direct knowledge or personal participation in the fraudulent procurement scheme. The dissent is noted in the record and does not alter the outcome. Dominic was completely still. He was looking at a fixed point on the table approximately 18 inches in front of him. The muscles in his jaw were working slightly, that was all. Additionally, Margaret continued, by unanimous vote, 7-0, the trustee council has appointed Evelyn Hartwell as executive chairwoman of Duca Global Holdings, with full authority over governance, succession, executive appointments, and institutional oversight, effective immediately. A long-held moment in the room. Then Harlan Voss from London. "Congratulations, Evelyn." She said, "Thank you." Dominic pushed back from the table and stood up. He didn't throw anything. He didn't raise his voice. He looked at Margaret and then, briefly, at Nathan, and then his eyes found Evelyn across the table and held there for a moment that stretched in ways that didn't have language. Then he said, "I'll need transition documents." "They'll be prepared by end of day," Nathan said. He nodded. "Once." And he walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. The same posture, she realized, with a jolt that she absorbed without expression, as the door frame she'd gripped in the hallway of their penthouse 2 nights ago. His back was to her. "I built something here," he said. "Not to anyone specifically, just into the room. Whatever else happened, I want that on the record too." Nobody said anything. He left. The room reorganized itself in the way rooms do after a seismic event. People moving, papers being gathered, voices resuming at slightly too careful volumes. Margaret sat down and immediately began issuing instructions to her staff about press communication protocols and transition documentation. Nathan came to Evelyn's side and they spoke quietly about the next 72 hours, the announcement timeline, the internal communications that would need to go out before the story could reach anyone externally. Evelyn listened, responded, made decisions. 3 of them in the first 4 minutes, each one quick and grounded, the way she made all decisions. She was aware distantly of a kind of steadiness in her body that she didn't entirely trust yet. It felt too calm, like the specific stillness after a car accident when the adrenaline is still working and the full accounting of damage hasn't arrived yet. Her phone buzzed. Webb. She stepped away from Nathan and answered. "The federal investigators want a preliminary meeting," he said. "They're asking for access to the internal forensic audit documents to cross-reference with what's on the drive." "When?" "Tomorrow morning, if possible. They're moving fast. The buyer is a person of interest in an existing financial crimes investigation, and they want to leverage the timing." "Who is the buyer?" A beat. "They haven't released the name yet, but one of the agents told me off record that his firm has been on their radar for 2 years. This isn't isolated to Duca Global." She absorbed that. The money moving through Vertex Advisory, through Tyler Vaughn's shell company, through Sabrina's access, through Dominic's negligence, hadn't just been fraud against the institution. It had been part of something larger. The institution had been used as a conduit. "Tell them 9 a.m., she said, "my conference room. And Marcus, tell them we'll provide full cooperation, everything they need." "Understood." She hung up. She looked around the council chamber, at the people still in it, at the long table and the dark wood walls and the overhead lights that cast no shadows because there were no windows to create them. She thought, this is the room where it ended and started. She picked up her bag. She told Nathan she needed 2 hours before their next call. He nodded, recognized the tone, and didn't ask where she was going. She went upstairs. She went outside. Must. The air had made up its mind while she was underground. It was raining now, steady and purposeful, the kind of rain that wasn't going to stop for several hours. She stood under the building's overhang for a moment, watching it. The street was slick and silver. Cabs and black cars moved through the water. She didn't call her driver. She walked. She didn't go anywhere specific. She just walked, in the rain, without an umbrella, and let the city move around her. Her blazer got wet. Her hair got wet. She didn't mind it. She needed the physical reality of the world right now. The cold of it, the noise, the smell of rain on pavement, and the shoulder brush of strangers who didn't know her and didn't need anything from her. 3 blocks in, her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. She answered. Ms. Hartwell. A man's voice, measured, slightly flat, the voice of someone in law enforcement who has learned to take the emotion out of their professional register. This is Special Agent Roland Marsh, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. I apologize for the direct call. I got your number from Marcus Webb. Agent Marsh. I understand you've agreed to a preliminary meeting tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock, yes. I wanted to make contact beforehand because there's a development from this afternoon's arrest that I thought you should be aware of before tomorrow. A pause. Are you somewhere you can speak freely? She looked at the street around her. Rain, strangers, nobody within earshot. Yes, she said. The individual taken into custody this afternoon, Ms. Vaughn, has asked to cooperate with our investigation. She's indicated she's willing to provide information about the full scope of the scheme, including parties we haven't yet identified, in exchange for consideration on her charges. That's her right, Evelyn said. Yes, but part of what she's indicated she can provide is information about the buyer's network, specifically how they identified Duca Global as a target. Her claim is that she didn't initiate the external contact, that she was approached. Evelyn stopped walking. Approached by whom? That's what we're still working on. Another pause. Ms. Hartwell, the flash drive contained something we weren't expecting. In addition to the procurement documents and executive correspondence, it contained a second encrypted partition. The decryption is still in progress, but the preliminary content suggests there may be communications related to a coordinated effort to create financial instability within the institution over a period of 12 to 18 months. The rain was loud. She was aware of it loudly. You're describing a deliberate destabilization campaign, she said. We're not characterizing it yet, but the preliminary evidence suggests someone with knowledge of the institution's internal structure identified the combination of Dominic Moretti's governance gaps and Ms. Vaughn's position as an opportunity. He paused. This may be larger than embezzlement. We'll know more after decryption. She stood on the wet sidewalk and looked at the rain falling on the city and thought about something she hadn't let herself think about until this moment. Who benefited from destabilizing the Duca empire? Not Sabrina. Sabrina had been, in this reading, a tool, not an architect. Not the buyer, who was a middleman in something larger. Someone who knew the institution well enough to identify its weaknesses. Someone who had known about the governance gaps before the forensic audit. Someone who understood that Dominic's negligence and Sabrina's ambition, placed together, would create exactly the right conditions. Agent Marsh, she said carefully, I'll see you at 9 tomorrow. Bring everything you have on the second partition. We will. A beat. Ms. Hartwell, one more thing. In Ms. Vaughn's initial statement, she mentioned a name, someone she described as the original point of contact, the person who first suggested she consider documenting internal records for external value. Evelyn's grip on the phone was tight enough that she felt it in her knuckles. She says the name is Gregory Halst, Marsh said, former VP of Operations at Duca Global, terminated approximately 11 months ago. The name landed. She knew that name. She'd flagged Gregory Halst's procurement decisions twice in her written warnings to Dominic. Halst had left the company before the internal review could reach him. Resigned, not terminated, she corrected internally, and the distinction suddenly mattered enormously. He had resigned with a standard separation package and full confidentiality provisions. He had also, she now understood, taken something with him. Knowledge. Specific structural insider knowledge about where the institution was vulnerable, who had access to what, and how to use both from the outside. We flagged Halst's procurement decisions internally, she said. There should be documentation. We'll want all of it. You'll have it by 8 a.m. She hung up. She stood in the rain and the understanding settled through her in layers, each one colder than the last. This had not been opportunistic. Sabrina hadn't woken up one morning and decided to build a file for personal insurance and happened to find an external buyer. Someone had found Sabrina. Someone who already knew the institution's floor plan, every governance weakness, every oversight gap, every place where the right person with the right access could create damage that looked, from outside, like internal failure. Gregory Halst had not resigned because he was tired. He'd resigned because he'd already set the mechanism in motion and needed to be outside the building when it activated. She turned around and walked back the way she'd come. Faster now, not running but close to it, her wet shoes striking the pavement with a force that traveled up through her shins. She called Nathan. He picked up on one ring. What happened? Halst, she said. Gregory Halst. I need everything we have on his resignation. Every document, every communication, every separation agreement clause. Tonight. A sharp silence. Evelyn, what? Federal investigators have a cooperating witness placing him as the architect of the external scheme. He set Sabrina up as the inside access point before he left the company. She was walking fast now, the rain hitting her face. He used our governance gaps as a blueprint. He sold the blueprint to someone who used it to run money through us and simultaneously build a destabilization file. She heard Nathan's breath change, the particular quality of a 63-year-old man absorbing information that requires immediate recalibration. How long has he been outside the company? Nathan said. 11 months. And the scheme started 14 months ago, which means he began building it 3 months before he left. She ducked under an awning and pushed her wet hair back from her face. He was still inside when he started. He used his own access to set up the framework. Then he handed it to Sabrina, who he'd been cultivating, apparently, for long enough that she trusted the opportunity, and walked out the door. The confidentiality agreement. Meaningless if he was using his access to commit fraud before he left. Evelyn. Nathan's voice dropped to the register he used when he was thinking at full capacity and talking at the same time. If Halst was inside the system while this was being set up, there may be a deeper financial trail than what the forensic audit found. If he planted structures before he left, I know. She was already there, already past it, actually, already in the next calculation. Get Marcus back on the phone. Tell him to go back through Halst's executive access logs from the 14 months before his resignation. Everything he touched, every system, every approval, every document. We need to know if there's anything he built that's still running. A beat. Then Nathan said quietly, still running. If he set up mechanisms that continued to operate after he left, financial structures, information forwarding, automated access points, they may still be active. Her voice was level. She was in the part of herself that didn't panic, that only counted. We need to know before the FBI walks in tomorrow morning what they're going to find that we haven't found yet. A silence. Then, I'll get Marcus. 2 hours. 1. She stepped out from under the awning. The rain had not let up. She stood in it for a moment, facing the direction of the building she'd just left. And then she turned and looked at the city in the other direction. The direction of nothing specific, just the enormous, indifferent, sprawling fact of New York in the rain. She was the executive chairwoman of Duca Global Holdings. She had been, as of approximately 3 hours ago. She had achieved what the governance structure she'd built over 17 years had designed her to achieve. The institution was hers to protect. The succession had transferred cleanly, legally, with documented cause and unanimous trustee support. She had done everything correctly. And someone had been running a long game against the institution she'd built, for longer than she'd known. Through people she'd trusted, using systems she'd created, and the game might not be over yet. She walked back through the rain to her building. In the lobby, Gerald the doorman, not from the penthouse, This was her office building, she reminded herself. She was tracking too many buildings. Looked up from his desk. "Bad weather," he said. "Yes," she said. She rode the elevator to the 53rd floor. She walked to her office. She sat down. She opened her laptop and pulled up Gregory Halst's personnel file, his access logs, his last 90 days of internal system activity, and she began to read. The rain came down outside her windows, and the city glittered below, and Evelyn Hartwell sat at her desk and worked the way she always worked, without hurry, without drama, with a precision that the situation could not shake loose. And somewhere in the data, in the logs and the access records and the documents a man had touched before he walked out a door 11 months ago, believing he'd gotten away clean, she was going to find what he'd left behind. She was certain of it. Because Gregory Halst had been good, but he had built his scheme inside a structure Evelyn had designed. And nobody knew the architecture of that structure better than the person who had built it from the ground up, brick by brick, over 17 years, in rooms nobody else had thought to look inside. She found the first anomaly at 47 minutes, an automated reporting function buried 3 levels deep in the procurement management system, set up under Halst's credentials 13 months ago, that had been silently generating a weekly summary of all executive purchase approvals above $10 million and forwarding it to an external email address on a domain that did not belong to any Duca Global vendor or partner. She looked at the email domain. She opened a new browser window and ran a corporate registry search. The domain was registered to a holding company incorporated in the Cayman Islands 19 months ago. She ran the holding company name through a second search. The registered agent was a law firm she didn't recognize. She wrote down the name and opened a third window to search the firm and felt, as the results loaded, the specific sensation of a floor she'd believed solid beginning to reveal that it had always been glass. That beneath the empire she'd built and believed she understood completely, someone had been constructing a second architecture entirely, patient and invisible, designed not to take the institution down quickly, but to hollow it out slowly, from inside, until the right moment arrived to apply pressure from outside. The law firm's website came up. She looked at the listed partners. The third name on the list made her stop breathing for approximately 2 seconds. She breathed again. She looked at the name again to make sure she'd read it correctly. She had. She reached for her phone. The third name on the law firm's partner list was Victor Anselm. Evelyn knew that name. She knew it the way you know the name of a scar. Not because you think about it constantly, but because the body remembers even when the mind has moved on. Victor Anselm had been Marco Moretti's personal attorney for 11 years before Nathan Carlisle. He had been present at the original drafting of the Duca Global Governance Charter. He had been in the room for the succession conversations in the last year of Marco's life, the private ones, before the formal documents were signed. He had known the institutional architecture at its foundational level, not because he'd been given blueprints, but because he'd helped pour the concrete. He had parted ways with the Moretti family 6 years ago, amicably, or what had presented as amicably. A professional divergence, Marco had said, a difference in long-term vision for the firm. Evelyn had not been present for those conversations. She had been managing a shipping contract restructuring in Singapore and had come home to learn that Victor Anselm was no longer the family's counsel and Nathan Carlisle had formally taken over. She had asked Dominic once what had actually happened. He'd said, "Old business, nothing that concerns you." She had let it go. She had been managing 4 things simultaneously that month, and she had let it go. She was not letting it go now. She picked up her phone and called Nathan. He answered on the second ring. "I'm still with Marcus." "Victor Anselm," she said. Dead silence. "Nathan, where did you find that name?" His voice had gone somewhere she'd never heard it go before. Not quite fear, something older and more private than fear. Registered agent for the Cayman Holding Company connected to Halst's external forwarding address. She kept her voice flat. Cayman Incorporation was 19 months ago. That's 8 months after he left the family's representation. She heard Nathan breathe, a long, slow breath that told her more than words would have. "You knew," she said. "No. Quick. Certain. I didn't know about the scheme. I didn't know about any of this." "But you knew why he left." A pause that lasted 4 seconds. She counted. Marco asked me to manage his departure, Nathan said. He didn't tell me the full reason. He told me there had been a breach of trust and that he wanted it handled quietly to protect the institution. I drafted the separation terms. There was a non-disclosure component. Victor signed it. What kind of breach of trust? Another pause. Evelyn, I'm telling you everything I know. Nathan, she said his name the way you say the name of someone you are choosing to believe but need to hear confirm themselves. What kind of breach? Marco had discovered that Victor had been sharing governance information with a competing logistics consortium, not selling it. Marco couldn't prove money changed hands, but sharing it. Confidential structural information. In exchange for what, Marco never fully determined. A breath. He was old by then. He was sick. He didn't want a legal battle. He wanted Victor gone and contained, and he wanted the institution protected. She sat with that for a moment. Victor Anselm had been sharing institutional intelligence 6 years ago, and Marco had quietly contained it rather than destroying him. And Victor, contained but not destroyed, had spent 6 years building a different approach. Patient, architectural. He'd found Gregory Halst, possibly cultivated him, possibly simply identified him as a man with access and grievances, and ambition. And he'd used Halst to plant mechanisms inside the institution before Halst walked out. He'd used Sabrina as the inside hand after Halst left. He'd found an external buyer who was already under federal investigation and who wanted the information for purposes that went beyond Duca Global. He'd built a machine designed to run for years before anyone found the engine. The non-disclosure agreement, she said. It covered the specific incident Marco identified, not what Victor apparently built afterward. Can we use it? As evidence of a pattern, potentially. As a direct legal instrument against the scheme itself. I don't know yet. I need to look at the language. Another breath. Evelyn, if Victor is the architect of this, the federal investigators need to know tonight. Not tomorrow morning. Tonight. I know. She was already reaching for the card Agent Marsh had texted her contact information to after their call. Get the separation documents. Everything from Victor's departure. Any communication, any documentation, anything Marco left that touched on this. I need it in my hands by midnight. I'll find it. Nathan, she paused. Are you all right? A short silence. I should have pushed Marco harder on the details. At the time, I told myself it wasn't my place, that he had reasons. His voice was rough. I was wrong. You didn't know what he was going to do with 6 years and a grudge. No, but I should have made sure he couldn't do anything. She didn't offer him absolution. He wasn't asking for it, and she wouldn't have meant it yet if she had. Midnight, she said. Everything you have. She hung up and called Marsh. 10. Special Agent Roland Marsh was still in the federal building when she reached him at 7:43 p.m. He listened to what she told him without interrupting, which she appreciated. The particular discipline of someone who understood that interrupting a well-organized account was a form of waste. When she finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. Anselm, he said, you know the name. It's appeared in a related investigation. We hadn't connected it to Duca Global yet. A pause. Ms. Hartwell, I need to ask you directly. Is there any possibility that you or anyone currently in the institution's leadership has any ongoing relationship with Anselm? No, she said. My predecessor's separation from him was documented. I can provide those documents. My own legal work has run through Nathan Carlisle's firm for 17 years. There is no connection. I'll need to verify that independently. Verify whatever you need to verify. She said it without irritation. She meant it. I want this investigation to be airtight. Whatever that requires from my side, you'll have it. Another pause. We're going to move the morning meeting up. Can you be available at 7 a.m.? I'll be there at 6:30 if you need me. She hung up. She looked at her laptop screen. The law firm's website was still open. Victor Anselm's name in clean sans serif type beside a professional photograph. A man in his late 60s, gray-haired, the face of someone who had spent decades in rooms where decisions were made and had learned to look like the most reasonable person present. She looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she closed the browser window and began preparing the documents she would need in the morning. She worked until 1 a.m., not continuously. She made herself eat something at 10, a sandwich delivered from a place nearby, which she consumed at her desk without tasting it. She drank 3 cups of coffee, then switched to water when her hand started registering the caffeine as agitation she didn't have spare capacity for. She went through Hall's access logs systematically, flagging every anomaly she found and cross-referencing each one against the procurement timeline Webb had built. There were 7 more automated forwarding structures, all planted within a 4-month window before Halst resigned, all routing to email domains connected, through varying degrees of corporate separation, back to the same Cayman holding company. Some had already been deactivated, presumably when Sabrina's arrest cut off the receiving end, but 3 were still running. She shut them down herself with Marcus Webb on the phone talking her through the system protocols. Each one she closed felt like pulling a wire out of a wall. "That's all of them," Webb said when the last one went dark, "that we can find. If there are others we haven't found yet, the federal team will find them tomorrow." She rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand. "Good work, Marcus. Go home." "What about you?" "Soon." He didn't push. He knew her well enough by now. She finished the document package at 12:58. She sent it to Marsh's secure email address. She sent a parallel copy to Nathan and to the firm's internal compliance archive. She backed everything up. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. The building was nearly empty. She could feel its emptiness the way you feel an empty room differently from a full one. A different quality of sound, a different pressure in the air. Somewhere below, the cleaning crew was working their way through the floors. She could hear, distantly, the sound of a vacuum. She thought about Dominic. She thought about the first time she'd met him. Not the polished public version, not the man who walked into rooms like he'd bought them, but the actual first time, which had been at a deposition in a cramped conference room in a law office on Park Avenue, where he'd been a witness in a shipping dispute and she'd been the opposing counsel's associate, 29 years old with 2 years of practice and a way of asking questions that made people feel, momentarily, like the room had gotten smaller. He'd looked at her across the deposition table and said, when it was over, "You're either going to be very good at this or very terrifying." She'd said, "Why not both?" He'd laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of him, the kind that wasn't performed. And she'd thought, there's a person in there. 20 years ago. She let herself feel it, sitting in her empty office at 1 a.m, the full weight of it. Not as data, not as a governance problem, not as collateral damage in an institutional crisis. As a marriage. As 20 years of a person she had known more completely than she had ever known anyone, and who had known her, and what it meant that both of those things were true, and also that the marriage had ended on a Tuesday night in a hallway with a door left open. She cried. Briefly, without making much noise, the way she cried, always had cried, like it was something private that she was permitting herself rather than something that was happening to her. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and breathed and let it pass through. Then she wiped her face. She stood up. She gathered her bag. She turned off the desk lamp and walked through the dark office to the elevator. The federal meeting lasted 4 hours. Marsh had 3 colleagues with him and a forensic technology specialist who spent 90 minutes going through the automated structures Evelyn and Webb had identified the night before, confirming them, extending the map in directions the audit hadn't reached yet. By 10 a.m., they had a clear enough picture of Anselm's architecture to brief a federal prosecutor. Evelyn answered every question. She provided every document. When Marsh asked her whether the institution had any exposure, whether anything in the scheme could be read as organizational complicity rather than organizational victimhood, she said, "That determination is yours to make. Here is everything we have. I will not be in the business of telling you how to read it." Marsh looked at her when she said that. "Most people in your position," he said, "spend the first 2 hours of a meeting like this telling us how to read it." "I know," she said. By noon, federal investigators had issued a material witness summons for Victor Anselm. By 2 p.m., he had retained counsel. By 4 p.m., the story had reached financial media, so not the full story, not yet, but the outer edges of it. Federal investigation into financial fraud at Duca Global, executive changes, a former associate under scrutiny. Evelyn's communications team had been ready since 8 that morning. The institutional statement went out at 4:15, 9 minutes after the first media inquiry hit the press line. It was measured, factual, and calm, the tone of an institution that was managing a crisis rather than being consumed by one. Evelyn had written it herself, at midnight, between document packages. Dominic called her that evening. She was back at the hotel, finally, for the first time since morning. She'd showered. She'd changed into clothes that weren't damp from yesterday's rain. She was sitting in the chair by the window with a glass of water and the lights off, watching the park below in the early dark when his name appeared on her screen. She looked at it for 2 rings. She answered. "I saw the statement," he said. His voice was different from what it had been in the council chamber. Quieter. The careful structure gone, just his actual voice underneath. "Yes." "Victor Anselm." A pause. "My father never told me what really happened with Victor." "I know." "He told you?" "Nathan told me last night. Your father managed it quietly to protect the institution." She paused. "He was good at protecting the institution." A long silence on the line. Not empty. The kind of silence that has things in it, things neither person is ready to say out loud yet. "Was any of it mine?" Dominic said finally. "Any of what I built? Or was it always—" "It was always both of us," she said. And she meant it, which surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. "You built the culture, the loyalty, the way people showed up, the reason people wanted to work there. That was real, and it was yours." She looked out at the park. "I built the structure that held it up. Neither one worked without the other." Another silence. "I'm sorry," he said, for all of it. "Not for the council. I know why that happened. I mean, for—" He stopped. "For the part that started in the bedroom. I'm sorry for that." She breathed. Once. Twice. "I know you are," she said. "That's not forgiveness." "No, it's not." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what it is yet, Dominic. I know you're sorry. I know you weren't the architect of the fraud. The investigation will confirm that publicly, and I'll make sure of it. I know you made bad decisions for bad reasons, and I know some of them came from things I didn't see clearly either." She stopped. "But I can't tell you right now what I feel about what happened in that room. I'm not ready to know yet." He was quiet for a long time. "Okay," he said, "just that." "The divorce petition is filed," she said. "Your attorney should have received notification today." He did. "I'm not trying to take anything that isn't mine. I want a clean separation, fair accounting. Nathan will handle the institutional side, and your attorney can work directly with mine on the personal assets." "I know." A pause. "Evelyn, can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "Did you ever— Was there a point where you thought about just leaving, not activating Protocol 7, not any of it, just walking away from the whole thing?" She thought about it honestly. She owed him that much. "No," she said, "not because of the power, because of the people, because of what happens to 14,000 employees and their families if the institution collapses, because of what it would mean for every agreement, every relationship, every structure I spent 17 years building." She paused. "I couldn't leave it to burn. It wasn't built to burn." He made a sound that might have been a short, dry laugh, or might have been something else. "No," he said. "I guess it wasn't." She heard him breathe, long and slow. "Take care of it," he said. "I know you will, but take care of it." "I will." The line was quiet for a moment, neither of them talking, just the open connection between 2 phones in 2 different rooms in the same city. And then he said goodnight, and she said goodnight, and she ended the call. She sat in the chair for a long time afterward, in the dark, watching the park. Victor Anselm was indicted 11 weeks later on 7 federal counts, including wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and misappropriation of confidential institutional information. Gregory Halst, who had been located in Portugal, was extradited and indicted on 5 separate counts. The buyer, a man named Carver Stills, whose firm had been under federal investigation for unrelated financial crimes for 2 years, was charged with receiving stolen confidential information, conspiracy, and 3 additional counts that Marcia's office declined to discuss publicly until trial. Sabrina Vaughn cooperated fully. Her testimony was, by every account Evelyn received, comprehensive and precise. The account of a person who had made a catastrophic miscalculation and understood it completely and was now doing the only remaining thing she could do. She was charged with 2 counts. Her attorney negotiated a plea that reflected the cooperation. She would serve time, a reduced term, and she understood that. Evelyn did not attend any of the hearings. She read the summaries Nathan provided. She signed every document her own attorney needed her to sign. She responded to every federal request within the promised time frame. And she ran the institution. In the first 30 days of her chairmanship, she rewrote the procurement authorization protocol, raising the trustee co-signature threshold from $50 million to $25 million, and adding a mandatory independent review layer for all new vendor relationships above $5 million. She restructured the compliance division, doubling its staff and creating a direct reporting line to the trustee council that bypassed executive authority. She commissioned an independent governance audit, not of the fraud that was the federal investigators' territory, but of every system, every process, every delegation chain in the institution, looking for structural weaknesses that had nothing to do with Anselm or Halst or Sabrina. Weaknesses she might have built in herself without knowing it. She found several. She fixed them. She put in place an oversight mechanism that required any sitting executive chair, including herself, to submit to trustee review every 18 months, with the review criteria written into the governance charter in language that could not be quietly modified without a supermajority board vote. She told Nathan, when he reviewed the language, "This includes me. If I make decisions that compromise the institution, the process has to be able to reach me. Build it that way." He'd looked at her over his reading glasses. Most people who've just won don't design systems to check themselves. Most people who've just won don't understand what winning costs yet, she said. He'd nodded slowly and written it in. Tult. She sold the penthouse in September. She'd been back exactly once with her assistant and 2 moving staff to retrieve her personal belongings. She'd been efficient about it. She had not stood in the bedroom doorway. She had moved through the rooms with the specific purposefulness of someone who has decided that sentiment is for after, and that after has not yet arrived. The sale closed quickly. The Manhattan market was what it was. She donated the proceeds to an employee emergency fund she established within the Duca Global Benefits structure, a resource for any employee facing sudden financial hardship, funded at a level that could actually make a difference. She moved into a house by the river. It was smaller than the penthouse. Considerably smaller by square footage, which didn't bother her at all. It had a study with windows on 3 sides, and a back deck that overlooked the water, and a kitchen with enough light in the mornings to eat breakfast in without turning on the overhead fixture. She didn't have a doorman. She had a neighbor, an older woman named Pat, who gardened with a ferocity that Evelyn found genuinely admirable, and who had introduced herself by bringing over a container of homemade soup the week Evelyn moved in, and who had not asked a single question about anything, and who had therefore become the most restful human presence in Evelyn's current life. She had dinner with Pat twice in the first month. They talked about the river and about Pat's garden, and once about a book they had both read and had different opinions about, and the disagreement was the kind of clean, impersonal disagreement that felt luxurious after a year of every conversation mattering enormously. She slept. In the river house. Actually slept. Not the tactical unconsciousness of hotel couches and office sofas, but real sleep, the kind that returned her to the world feeling like a human being. She hadn't understood how profoundly she'd been running on reserves until she stopped running. She wasn't happy, exactly. She was honest enough not to call it that yet. She was somewhere in the territory between survival and recovery, moving in the right direction, aware that the distance between where she was and where she might eventually be was real and wasn't going to close quickly. That was all right. She had always been better at the long game than the short one. Nathan came to the river house on a Tuesday evening in October, unannounced, which he'd never done before in 17 years. She found him on the front step when she came back from a walk, holding a sealed envelope, wearing the expression of a man who has been carrying something for a while and has finally made the decision to put it down. "This was in Marco's papers," he said. "I found it when I was going through the files related to the Anselm separation. It was in a sealed envelope with your name on it. He must have..." It must have been filed with his personal documents when he died and nobody found the right occasion to, or perhaps he intended for it to be found eventually. He paused. I should have gone through those files more carefully 6 years ago. I'm sorry. She took the envelope. Her name was on it in Marco Moretti's handwriting. She had not seen that handwriting in 6 years. Come inside, she said. I'll make coffee. He shook his head. I think you should read it alone. She looked at him. Call me after, he said, and he went back to his car. She stood on the front step for a moment with the envelope in her hands. The river was visible at the end of the road, black and silver in the October evening. Somewhere on the water, a bird made a sound she didn't recognize. She went inside. She sat down at her study desk. She opened the envelope carefully, the way you open things that have been waiting. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten, dated 8 months before Marco's death. She read it slowly. He had written it, he explained in the first paragraph, because he was sick enough to understand he might not have the time to say it properly in person, and because there were things Evelyn needed to know that he had not said while he had the chance. He wrote it in the direct, slightly formal way he wrote everything. Marco Moretti had never been a sentimental man, which had always made her trust him. He wrote about building the empire, about the costs of it, not the financial costs, the human ones, the compromises, the decisions he'd made that he was proud of, and the ones he'd made that he wasn't. He wrote about what it required to lead something that mattered, and how few people he had encountered in his life who had both the intelligence and the character to do it without eventually losing one to the other. He wrote about Dominic. With love, genuinely, she felt it in the sentences, and with a clear-eyed accounting of his son's limitations that must have cost something to commit to paper. He wrote that Dominic had gifts he himself had not possessed: warmth, magnetism, the ability to inspire loyalty in ways that couldn't be manufactured. And he wrote that Dominic lacked the thing that those gifts sometimes obscured: the judgment to know when to be still, when to listen, when the room required restraint rather than presence. He had known his son would struggle. And then Marco wrote about the governance structure. He had not left Protocol 7 to chance. He had known about it. Evelyn had disclosed it to him in general terms in the year before he died, seeking his blessing rather than permission, and he had given it. But he had gone further than she'd known. The succession clause in the original charter, the one predating Protocol 7, the one Marco himself had written, had contained a final provision that Evelyn had read dozens of times without fully understanding its reach. She had always interpreted it as a general statement of succession principles. It was not general, it was specific. Marco wrote, I have always known that the empire's greatest danger was not external. It was the possibility that the person holding it would mistake authority for wisdom. I built one safeguard I did not discuss with anyone, because safeguards discussed too widely become useless. The final succession clause in the original charter does not simply establish criteria for emergency review. It establishes, in the language of institutional law I had 3 attorneys verify, that in any scenario where the charter's emergency provisions are fully activated, where an executive chair is removed for cause, and a successor is appointed by unanimous trustee vote, all executive authority transfers not only in title but in founding right. The successor does not inherit the position. The successor inherits the institution as it was intended when it was built. There is a difference. I hope, by the time you read this, you understand what that difference is. She sat with that for a long time. The founding right. Not administrative authority. Not inherited stewardship. The institution as Marco Moretti had intended it. In its original purpose, its founding ethics, its original obligation to the people it served and employed and affected. He had designed it to come to her. Not because he had been certain of what Dominic would do. He had written as much. I am not writing this because I know how it will unfold. I am writing this because I know that institutions outlive the specific failures of specific people, and I know who in this family has the judgment to ensure that this one does. She reached the final paragraph. The ships were always yours, Evelyn. I built them. Dominic sailed them. But you understood what they were for. That understanding is the only thing that makes an empire worth the cost of building it. Do not let anyone, including yourself, forget that. She put the letter down on the desk. She did not cry this time. She felt something different, something quieter and more permanent than grief, The feeling of understanding something about the shape of your own life that you couldn't have understood from inside the middle of it. She had spent 17 years believing she was supporting something that someone else had built. She had been right, and she had also been wrong. And the distance between those two things was the distance between the story she had told herself and the story that had actually been true all along. She picked up her phone and called Nathan. "I read it," she said when he answered. "I thought you should know," he said. "Before the formal transition documents are finalized, before you decide how to characterize your chairmanship publicly going forward. I thought you should understand what you actually hold." "He always knew," she said, "about the governance structure, about Protocol 7. He told me, near the end, that he'd built a room in the foundation that only you would ever know how to find." Nathan's voice was quiet. "I didn't understand what he meant at the time." She looked out the study windows at the river in the dark. "The institution was never at risk," she said. Not triumphantly, just as a fact that was settling into its place. Not really. Even when the fraud was running, even during the worst of the governance failures, the structure was sound enough to survive it, because of how it was built. "You built it to survive," Nathan said. "We built it to survive," she said. "Marco and I," without ever quite saying so directly to each other. A short silence. "What do you need from me?" Nathan said. "Nothing tonight." She looked at the letter on her desk. "Come by Friday. We'll talk about the next phase, governance review, the annual trustee meeting, the compliance division expansion. There's a lot to do." "There always is," he said, which was as close as Nathan Carlyle got to warmth. She hung up. She folded Marco's letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk. The one she'd decided, when she moved in, would be for things that needed to be kept without being referred to constantly. And she placed the envelope inside. She closed the drawer. She got up and walked through the house to the back deck and stood in the October night and looked at the river. It was moving, as it always was, as it had been moving before any of this had happened and would continue to move when all of it was memory. The water was dark, and it caught the light from the house behind her in shifting fragments. She thought about Marco's final line. "The ships were always yours." She thought about what it meant to own something, not because you possessed it, but because you understood it, its purpose, its weight, its cost, the obligation it carried toward the people it affected. She thought about the 4,000 jobs in Geneva, and the 14,000 across the institution, and the procurement officers and the compliance staff, and the logistics coordinators, and the hotel employees and the shipping crews, all the people who showed up every day to do their work inside a structure they didn't design and couldn't fully see, trusting that the structure was sound. She had made it sound, not perfectly. She would never claim perfection, and the governance audit she'd commissioned had found enough gaps to keep her honest about that. But sound enough, accountable enough, strong enough to survive the failure of the person at the top, which was the only real test of whether an institution had been built correctly. It had survived. She had not come through this without cost. That was important to hold clearly. She had lost her marriage. Not in the hallway on that Tuesday night, she understood now, but earlier, gradually, in the accumulated weight of 17 years of decisions made alone because she'd stopped expecting them to be made together. She had lost a version of herself she would not recover, the woman who had not yet stood in that doorway, who had still been able to tell herself a different story about what she was part of. Those losses were real. They were not smaller for being survived, but she was standing on a deck by a river in October, and the air was cold and clean, and the water was moving, and the institution she'd spent her life building was functional and legitimate and accountable, and the people inside it were safer now than they'd been 6 months ago. And she had her study with the windows on 3 sides, and her neighbor Pat with the aggressive garden, and the particular kind of quietness that comes after a storm has passed and the air is washed clear of everything it was carrying. She wasn't starting over. She didn't believe in the mythology of starting over, of wiping clean and beginning fresh, as though the weight of everything that had happened could be cleanly set aside. She was continuing. From here, from this specific point, carrying what she carried, knowing what she now knew, that was enough. More than enough, actually. if she was being precise about it. She stayed on the deck until the cold drove her inside. She made tea she didn't really want and carried it to her study and sat down with the river still visible through the glass. And she opened her laptop and she began drafting the agenda for the institution's quarterly governance review. There was a lot to do. She had always worked best at night. Outside, the river moved through the dark, carrying what rivers carry. Everything given to them, neither judging it nor holding it, just moving it along toward wherever the current went. And Evelyn Hartwell worked in the quiet light of her study, and the house held her the way houses hold people who have finally found the right room, and the October night was long and still and full of the particular piece of things that have found their shape at last.